have you ever been in like one of those sensory deprivation tanks?
Oh, the float tanks. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. Where you float in that skin temperature salt water and they shut the heavy lid.
And it is just pitch black. Dead silent.
Yeah. And for like the first few minutes, it's super relaxing, right?
Oh, definitely. It's like a spa treatment.
But then your brain realizes it isn't receiving any data. And I mean, the human brain absolutely despises a vacuum.
It really does. It panics.
So it just starts manufacturing things. You start hearing a phantom hum, or you see these bursts of static in the dark.
Right. Or your own heartbeat starts sounding like a bass drum.
Exactly. Because when you strip away everything we rely on to navigate the world, the mind just turns inward.
It starts searching for threats that aren't even there.
Which is wild.
Well, scientifically, that phenomenon is called sensory substitution.
Oh, really? I didn't know there was a term for it.
Yeah, it's where the brain frantically tries to fill in the missing gaps of your environment.
Because it thinks something is wrong.
Exactly. Evolutionarily, a lack of sensory input means you are vulnerable. Like if you can't see or hear the forest around you.
So you can't see or hear the predator.
Spot on. You are basically a sitting duck.
And that biological panic response, that desperate need for the brain to fill a void, is basically the exact mechanism breaking movie theater audiences in two right now.
Over A24’s latest release, right? Undertone.
Yes, Undertone, a film that essentially like weaponizes the absence of information.
It's a fascinating case study.
It really is. And we've got an amazing stack of sources for you on this deep dive today.
There's a lot to cover.
Tons. We are pulling from two violently opposing Reddit threads straight from the r/A24 community.
Those threads are intense.
Super intense. Plus, we have a deeply reverent professional review by Brian Tallarico over at RogerEbert.com.
Which is a huge endorsement.
Massive. And finally, we're looking at the film's sharply dated Rotten Tomatoes page.
Looking at the data on Rotten Tomatoes, you immediately see a fracture.
Oh, it's not even close.
No, it goes far beyond typical internet arguing.
Totally.
The film holds a solid 74% certified fresh reading from professional critics.
Which is, really respectable for a horror indie.
Very respectable. But then the audience score is sitting at a dismal 50%.
And see, a 50% audience score is bad, but I mean, it isn't historically terrible,
Right. There are plenty of mediocre, forgettable movies hovering around 50%.
Exactly. But going through these Reddit threads, people are treating this film like an absolute war zone.
The vitriol is off the charts.
It is. So the mission for us today is figuring out why a middle-of-the-road score is generating this level of pure anger.
And the anecdotes from opening weekend are just wild to read.
Insane. You have one camp of viewers claiming they were like physically paralyzed in their seats.
Staring at the screen in crushing dread.
Yeah, they said they were terrified to even look at the emergency exit signs in the dark.
But then you have another camp of viewers talking about their theaters basically bursting into laughter.
Loud collective groans. People actively booing when the credits hit.
And literal reports of audience members falling asleep in the front rows.
Who falls asleep at a horror movie?
Someone who is profoundly bored, I guess. It's a complete polarizing of the viewing public.
So our goal here is to guide you through this intensely subjective landscape, right?
Exactly. We need to look impartially at both the structural artistry the critics are praising,
right,
and the intense frustration driving general audiences up the wall.
Because we aren't picking sides here. We're just reporting what the sources say.
Definitely. To understand Undertone, we have to look past the marketing and examine how the film fundamentally manipulates our expectations of fear.
Okay, so let's start with the literal constraints of what this movie is.
Because the production context dictates literally every choice you see on screen.
Yes. So the protagonist is Evie, played by Nina Kiri.
She is a paranormal podcaster, right?
Yeah, she runs this show, but she has recently moved back into her childhood home.
But she isn't there to, remodel or settle down.
No, not at all. She is there to provide end-of-life care for her dying, mostly catatonic mother.
Who is played by Michelle Duquet.
Right.
And that setup grounds the narrative in a very specific, mundane type of horror before any supernatural elements are even introduced.
It's super heavy right out of the gate.
Extremely heavy. The reality of terminal caregiving is an isolating, emotionally bankrupting experience.
Yeah, you are trapped in a domestic space that has basically transformed from a home into a makeshift hospice.
Exactly. The house already feels like a tomb.
Evie is carrying this massive emotional weight, but her only lifeline to the outside world is her laptop.
And her podcast.
Right. She and her co-host, Justin, played by Adam DeMarco, run the Undertone podcast.
And they have a very classic Mulder and Scully dynamic.
I love that comparison. Justin is the believer who thinks every little dust orb is a ghost.
And Evie is the skeptic, constantly trying to debunk him.
Yeah. So for their series finale, they decide to investigate a batch of 10 audio files.
Sent in by a couple named Mike and Jessa, right?
Correct. Mike and Jessa claim their home is infested by something malicious.
So this is where the core mechanic of the film kicks in.
Yes. When Evie puts on her headphones.
Because as she listens to the horrors happening to Mike and Jessa, the sounds from the tapes slowly begin to bleed into the physical space of her own house.
Which is such a creepy concept.
Structurally, it is a brilliant framing device.
But to understand why the execution of that framing device infuriated so many people, we have to talk about the budget.
Oh, the budget is a huge factor here.
Director Ian Tucson shot this entire film for $500,000.
Which, I mean, in the modern industry, even for independent cinema, that is an aggressively small amount of money.
It's basically couch change for Hollywood.
Exactly. So to make it work, he had to embrace severe limitations.
Right. He shot the entire movie inside a single location.
His own parents' house.
Which is just wild to me. Brian Tallarico noted in his review that filming a movie about a dying parent inside your own parent's actual house is something Tucson might want to unpack with a therapist.
It's incredibly bleak.
Super bleak. But that extreme constraint is exactly what sparked the first wave of audience backlash.
Because of how it plays out visually.
Yeah. One Reddit user boiled the entire viewing experience down to this, and I quote, "The movie is essentially watching someone sit at a desk, listening to the movie Paranormal Activity."
Which is hilarious.
It is hilarious, but kind of undeniably accurate.
It really is.
Yeah.
Most of the runtime is literally Nina Kiri sitting in a dimly lit room, staring at an audio waveform on a laptop.
So if a director delivers basically a one-woman show of a girl wearing headphones, are general audiences justified in calling it boring A24 slop?
That phrase came up a lot.
It did. Or is there like a cinematic language here that people are just missing?
Well, the term post-horror gets thrown around a lot by critics to describe this specific cinematic language.
Post-horror. Okay, what does that actually mean?
So traditional horror relies on a biological payout.
Like the roller coaster drop.
Exactly. The tension builds, the monster jumps out, the orchestral sting hits, your adrenaline spikes.
And then you get a moment of release to catch your breath.
Right. You're conditioned to wait for the jump scare.
It's what we expect when we buy a ticket.
But what Tucson does is deliberately withhold that release. He strips the film of cheap jump scares entirely.
Oh, wow. None at all.
None. There are no sudden loud noises masking a cat jumping onto a table.
I hate that cat trope so much.
We all do. Instead of that, he uses a rigidly static camera and extreme negative space.
Okay, let's break down negative space for a second, because the visual composition of this film is deeply unsettling.
Negative space is basically the area around and between the subjects of an image.
So the empty parts.
Right. In Undertone, Tucson will frame Evie sitting at her desk, but he pushes her all the way to the far bottom left corner of the screen,
leaving all that empty room.
The other 80% of the frame is just the dark, yawning emptiness of her open bedroom door.
And the pitch black hallway beyond it.
And he holds these shots for uncomfortably long durations.
Yeah, and as a viewer, your eyes are just frantically darting around that dark hallway.
You are scanning the shadows, looking for a silhouette.
You see a coat hanging on a chair in the background, and your brain insists it just moved.
That is exactly the sensory substitution we talked about earlier.
Oh, wow, full circle.
By giving you nothing to look at but darkness, the film forces your imagination to do the heavy lifting.
You become a co-conspirator in terrifying yourself.
Which is brilliant, but also exhausting. For a certain type of viewer, that forced participation creates a suffocating, unbearable tension.
Because they buy into it.
Right. But for a viewer who is passively waiting for the movie to deliver a tangible monster,
that lingering static shot just feels broken.
It feels like waiting for a movie to start that never actually does.
Which brings us perfectly to the core mechanism of the film. Because Tucson intentionally starved the audience of visual information, he had to rely entirely on the auditory experience.
The sound design is paramount here.
It isn't just an element of Undertone, it is the monster.
If you took the audio out of this movie, the visual framework would collapse instantly.
It would just be a silent film of a girl on a laptop.
Exactly. Sound in horror is often used as a punctuation mark, a loud bang to underscore a visual scare.
But here, the sound is the entire sentence.
The technical breakdown of how they achieve this in theaters is truly fascinating.
Tell me about it, because the Reddit threads were obsessed with the theater audio.
So the audio engineers specifically mixed the film to utilize the massive Dolby Atmos systems in modern cinemas.
The surround sound stuff.
Yes, but way more advanced. When Evie is just walking around her house, the audio is normal, ambient room tone.
Just standard movie sound.
But the second she puts her over-ear headphones on to listen to the tapes, the entire audio mix in the physical movie theater drops out.
Whoa!
And the audience experiences a simulated active noise-canceling hum.
Wait, like the ANC on AirPods?
Exactly like that. The ANC hum is a brilliant psychological trick.
How does that actually work in a theater?
Well, what active noise canceling actually does is use microphones to pick up ambient low-frequency noise, and then it generates a sound wave that is the exact negative of that noise to cancel it out.
It literally erases the sound wave.
Right. When a theater sound system simulates that sudden vacuum, it instantly isolates you.
It cuts out the sound of the air conditioning in the theater, the shuffling of the people next to you.
It forcibly locks you into Evie's exact point of view. You are trapped inside the headphones with her.
That is so claustrophobic. And once you are trapped in that vacuum, the Dolby Atmos takes over.
Because Atmos isn't just about making things loud. It's an object-based audio format.
Meaning they can put the sound anywhere.
It allows sound engineers to play specific sounds in a three-dimensional space around the theater.
So when Evie plays the tape, you aren't just hearing a scary noise from the front screen.
Not at all.
A Reddit user mentions sitting in the back row and feeling their physical seat shake from the low frequencies.
They map the audio so that when the whispers happen on the tape, it literally sounds like someone is standing 2 inches behind your left ear.
That would make me jump out of my skin.
That spatial mapping bypasses your logical brain entirely.
Because your body just reacts.
Even if you know you are sitting in a theater in a mall, when a sound originates directly behind your head, your autonomic nervous system reacts as if there is a physical entity right behind you.
The actual contents of the tapes are deeply unnerving too. It's not just random noises.
It's actually on them.
It starts with these distant, echoing baby noises in an empty house.
Always creepy.
Always. Then it escalates. There is a deeply unsettling sequence where the podcast plays a voicemail from a caller who lives down the street from Mike and Jessa.
Adding this bizarre layer of real-world documentation to the haunting.
Yeah, it grounds it. But the moment that gets brought up constantly in the discussions is the nursery rhyme.
Oh, I read about this.
The tapes capture the sound of someone or something singing ba 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 black sheep.
But it's not normal?
No, the audio is reversed, heavily distorted, and pitched down.
Nursery rhymes are a staple of horror because they corrupt innocence.
The classic trope.
But in this context, it also serves a thematic purpose.
How so?
Think about it. Evie is caring for her mother, effectively reversing their roles.
Oh.
The mother is now the helpless infant, and the daughter is the caretaker.
Wow, I didn't even put that together.
Distorting a nursery rhyme mirrors the distortion of Evie's domestic life.
That is so dark. And then the tapes start acknowledging Evie directly.
Wait, the recording talks to her?
Yes. There is one specific moment where Evie is listening, and the chaotic audio on the tape suddenly drops to dead silence.
And then what?
A voice, clear as day, breaks the fourth wall of the recording and says directly into Evie's ear, and by extension, the audience's ear, "She's in the 10th file, you shouldn't have listened."
Oh, it's the classic cursed media trope.
Exactly.
The idea that simply by consuming the media, you have invited the entity into your own life.
Like the videotape in The Ring.
Yes. Once you watch it, you're doomed.
Now, this is where the marketing department comes into play, and honestly, where a massive chunk of the audience backlash originates.
Marketing can really make or break expectations.
A prominent sentiment on the r/A24 threads was from users who felt actively lied to by the promotional campaign.
Because of the social media ads.
Yeah, they were getting bombarded with Instagram and TikTok ads that leaned incredibly hard into the Atmos mix.
Pushing the audio gimmick.
The film was literally billed with the tagline, "The scariest movie you will ever hear."
Which is a bold claim.
Super bold. But if you market a movie as a relentless sensory assault, didn't the studio set expectations far too high for what is essentially a slow burn indie film shot in a living room?
The marketing undeniably misaligned audience expectations.
Totally.
Selling Undertone as an aggressive thrill ride is like selling a meditation retreat as a rock concert.
That is the perfect analogy.
The audience showed up braced for impact, but the film delivers an exercise in restraint.
Right.
The terror in this film relies on our evolutionary biology. Think about early humans.
Okay.
We are wired to be terrified of sounds in the dark precisely because we cannot visually verify the source.
Right. If you are sitting around a campfire thousands of years ago and you hear a twig snap in the pitch black woods, your brain immediately assumes it is a predator.
You don't wait to find out.
The people who assumed it was just the wind didn't survive to pass on their genes.
Exactly. Our brains are designed to fill visual gaps with worst-case scenarios to keep us alive.
And Tucson exploits that survival mechanism.
Because he refuses to show you a visual monster. Every creak in the floorboards of Evie's house, every distorted whisper on the podcast feels monumental.
The threat is omnipresent because it could literally be anywhere.
But, and this is a crucial distinction, modern theater audiences are accustomed to a visual payoff.
We want to see the ghost.
We expect the twig snapping to eventually reveal the monster leaping out of the woods.
It's the horror movie equivalent of a sneeze that just won't happen.
I hate that feeling.
You feel the buildup, your eyes water, you take the sharp breath in, and then nothing.
The tension just sits there trapped in your chest.
Exactly. For the people who love the film, living in that agonizing pre-sneeze tension for 90 minutes was a masterclass in anxiety.
It was exactly what they wanted.
But for the people who hated it, that lack of release wasn't scary. It was just intensely frustrating.
And that frustration inevitably boiled over.
Oh, it boiled over big time.
A slow burn setup requires a payoff that justifies the wait. The climax of Undertone is what truly ignited the theater rebellions.
The third act is where the movie throws away the subtle audio dread and aggressively introduces some of the most debated tropes in the entire genre.
Let's talk about the demonic element.
Yeah, because Evie starts trying to research the history of the house from the tapes.
Looking for clues about what might be causing the phenomenon.
Right. She stumbles upon lore regarding an ancient Mesopotamian demon.
Introducing an ancient named demon is a trope that shifts the film entirely.
How so?
It moves it from ambiguous psychological dread into explicit codified supernatural territory.
It makes it a monster movie.
It gives the threat a name, a history, and usually a set of rules.
But the execution of this reveal drove Reddit users absolutely insane.
I can imagine.
Evie is searching for this obscure entity online, and she somehow manages to spell this deeply complex ancient Mesopotamian name perfectly on the first try.
Which never happens.
Never!
Yeah.
And then, as the search results load, the screen glitches and the words evil and demon flash across her entire computer monitor in huge, bold letters.
Oh no. That is so heavy-handed.
One user specifically highlighted this exact moment, saying, "When it displayed the words evil and demon, I was like, okay, this movie is done."
I kind of agree with them.
It felt like a massive downgrade in sophistication, you know?
Yeah, you go from this nuanced, invisible auditory threat to the laptop essentially yelling, "B, I'm an evil demon."
It shatters the suspension of disbelief.
The film had been demanding that the audience do the intellectual work of imagining the horror.
Right.
To suddenly flash the word evil on a screen feels like the director is suddenly treating the audience as if they lack imagination.
Like he doesn't trust them to get it.
It violates the established tone of the film.
And the tropes don't stop there. The house is heavily decorated with religious imagery.
Which is pretty standard.
You've got crucifixes on the walls, Jesus paintings, and crucially, this incredibly disturbing statue of the Virgin Mary.
What's wrong with the statue?
Well, if the camera lingers on it long enough, you realize the statue has a massive gaping mouth.
Oh.
And there are tiny babies sculpted to look like they are crawling all over her.
Oh, that is horrific. But the corrupted religious iconography introduces heavy themes of perverted maternity.
Which ties back to the caregiving.
Exactly. We know Evie is dealing with caregiving, and there are subtle hints throughout the film regarding her own anxieties about pregnancy and motherhood.
Okay, so the statue isn't just a spooky prop.
No, it's a thematic anchor trying to tie her personal trauma to the supernatural threat.
But whether the audience caught that thematic connection or not, everything boils over into the final 20 minutes, and this climax sounds absolutely chaotic.
What actually happens?
Evie descends into what can only be described as a full-blown fever dream. The rules of reality in the house completely break down.
Okay.
The light bulbs in the hallway in her bedroom start popping and shattering one by one. Methodically until there is only a single dim light fixture remaining directly above Evie.
creating that isolation again.
Yes, and the walls of the house are suddenly covered in frantic scribbled drawings.
Another classic trope.
The audio in the theater goes into absolute overdrive.
Yeah.
The Atmos system is just blasting a cacophony of the distorted tapes, the baby cries, and the noise-canceling hum.
Overwhelming the senses.
The tension is ratcheted up to 1,000.
And then the film cuts.
An abrupt, violently sudden cut to pitch black.
Just black.
The audio cuts out instantly. The movie is just over.
Wow.
And then it immediately rolls into what multiple users described as a comically randomized, almost upbeat credit sequence.
That is jarring.
There is no denouement, no explanation, no final confrontation, just a blackout.
It is deliberate denial of catharsis.
Which audiences hate.
Traditional narrative structure demands resolution. The hero defeats the monster, or the monster consumes the hero.
Right, we need closure.
By cutting to black at the peak of the crescendo, Toison leaves the audience stranded at the highest possible point of anxiety with zero narrative closure.
And leaving audiences stranded like that resulted in legendary theater reactions.
This is where the Reddit reports get really visceral.
You have people saying that the sheer atmospheric dread of the first hour literally put people to sleep in the front rows.
Which we mentioned earlier.
But when that abrupt cut to black happened, audible chuckles across the theater.
People were laughing.
20 people simultaneously groaning in frustration. Viewers were comparing the ending to low-effort DIY YouTube sketches where the creator just ran out of time.
That is harsh.
Or comparing it to Skinamarink, another wildly divisive experimental horror film from a few years ago that also tested audience patience with long, static shots of dark rooms.
I remember the debates over Skinamarink.
So I have to ask you, is a movie a structural failure if it relies on tired tropes like corrupted Mary statues and flashing computer screens?
It's a fair question.
Or is the failure purely in the mechanical execution of that final jarring cut to black?
The debate over tropes in horror is fascinating because horror, as a genre, actually thrives on them.
That's true.
We buy tickets specifically for the haunted houses, the demonic possessions, the creepy basements, and the cursed objects.
We want the greatest hits.
Tropes are the shared vocabulary between the filmmaker and the audience. A corrupted religious statue isn't inherently a failure, it's a familiar chord progression.
Right, it's like a 12-bar blues. Everyone uses the same structure, but the difference between a bar band and B.B. King is how you bend the notes.
Exactly. The issue audiences had wasn't the presence of the demon, it was the perception that the film didn't earn its ending.
Because it didn't finish the thought.
For many, that abrupt cut, combined with familiar tropes, felt like Toison simply ran out of ideas or ran out of his $500,000 budget and just pulled the plug on the production.
It felt unfinished.
However, if you look at Brian Tallarico's defense of the film, he argues the complete opposite.
I loved his take on this.
He posits that the refusal to explain anything is the film's masterpiece stroke.
Tallarico had this brilliant framing for it. He said, nightmares rarely offer exposition.
And he's totally right.
Think about it. When you wake up in a cold sweat from a terrifying dream, there isn't a narrator explaining the deep lust of the monster that was chasing you.
You just have the lingering physiological terror.
Just the sweat and the heartbeat.
Tallarico argues that if Toison had offered a neat, easily digestible conclusion, if a priest had shown up to explain the Mesopotamian demon, or if Evie had defeated it with a spell, it would have ruined the experiential nature of the film.
It would have made it safe.
The refusal to connect the dots is what makes it feel like a genuine, unfiltered panic attack.
A panic attack doesn't come with a glossary.
Exactly.
But human beings are inherently problem solvers. Because the film refuses to provide a glossary, the audience's nature takes over.
We cannot stand a vacuum.
Never. And so, the hardcore fans on the r/A24 subreddit stepped in to fill that narrative void.
They did the work the movie wouldn't do.
These viewers scoured the movie frame by frame and generated wildly different, insanely detailed theories about the deep lore of Undertone.
And the evidence they pull is fascinating.
Let's unpack the two dominant theories, because depending on which one you believe, you are essentially watching two completely different movies.
Okay, let's hear the first one.
Theory number one is the psychosis angle,
which is very popular in ambiguous horror.
This theory argues that there is absolutely no supernatural element in the film whatsoever.
None at all.
Zero. The podcast, the audio files from Mike and Jessa, maybe even just in the co-host, none of it is real.
This relies entirely on a psychological interpretation of Evie's environment.
Right. It posits that Evie is suffering from a devastating psychotic break brought on by extreme caregiver burnout and underlying fears regarding her own pregnancy.
So Justin isn't a real person on a video call.
No, in this reading, Justin is just a manifestation of her own fractured psyche.
Wow.
Justin represents her desperate desire to believe in something beyond her grim reality, while Evie represents her own grounded, cynical exhaustion.
It's a coping mechanism. She invents a supernatural mystery to escape the mundane horror of watching her mother slowly die.
And the breadcrumbs the Reddit detectives found to support this are incredibly dark.
What do they find?
There is a very brief, highly ambiguous visual moment in the film where Evie is leaning over her mother's bed.
Okay.
The psychosis theory argues that Evie didn't just care for her mother, she actively suffocated her to end the suffering and to free herself from the burden.
That is incredibly grim.
It gets worse. Furthermore, they theorize that the trauma of what she did caused Evie to throw herself down the stairs, which is heavily referenced in the house's architecture, resulting in the loss of her baby. Jesus.
But the absolute most chilling piece of evidence they dug up is buried in the audio mix of the climax.
During all that noise and chaos.
Right before the cut to black, underneath the popping light bulbs and the static, there is a demonic-sounding whisper.
Did someone isolate the audio?
Yes. Users isolated the audio and claimed the voice is saying that she licked the blood off her fingers.
Oh, wow. If that audio interpretation is accurate, it completely reframes the narrative.
Doesn't it?
The tapes from Mike and Jessa aren't haunted recordings, they are auditory hallucinations.
Exactly.
The horrific sounds Evie hears are her own mind processing her guilt and her trauma, externalizing her internal collapse.
It transforms the movie from a ghost story into a devastating character study of a woman losing her mind in a dark house.
That is a very compelling read of the film.
But then you have the opposing camp. Theory 2 is what we can call the literal cycle.
And they disagree with the psychosis angle.
Violently rejected. They argue the supernatural elements are 100% real, and the key lies in the visual cinematography. This theory requires paying extremely close attention to the negative space and the static camera setups we discussed earlier.
Yes, the Reddit sleuths pointed out a brilliant structural trick.
What did they notice?
They noticed that whenever a specific action happens on the haunted audio take, say, Mike's footsteps running frantically down a wooden staircase, or a specific door hinges creaking open.
Yeah.
Tueson's camera is showing that exact corresponding location in Evie's house.
Oh, that is clever.
It isn't just atmospheric B-roll. The camera is literally mapping the audio of the tapes onto Evie's physical space.
The implication being that Evie isn't just listening to a haunted house, she is living inside the exact house where the tapes were recorded.
Yes. The audio is a prophecy of what is currently happening to her.
So the cycle is repeating itself.
Exactly. This theory also leans heavily into the religious iconography.
How does the religion fit in?
The timeline suggests that Evie and her mother were actually safe from this Mesopotamian entity as long as they maintained their faith.
Because the mother was devout.
Right, and as long as Evie continued to pray with her, the demon was kept at bay. But as the caregiver burnout sets in, the exhaustion wins. Evie stops praying, she loses her faith.
She drops the spiritual shield around the house.
And the consequence is immediate. Her mother dies. But because the shield is down, the mother's corpse becomes a vessel.
The entity possesses the mother's body.
So in that chaotic final scene with the lights popping and the drawings on the walls, it isn't an invisible demon attacking Evie in the dark.
It is the possessed corpse of her own mother coming to kill her.
Yes. So you have two radically different interpretations of the exact same 90 minutes of film.
One is grounded in the tragic realism of postpartum psychosis and eldercide.
And the other is a fatalistic supernatural doom loop.
But hold on, let's look at this from a filmmaking perspective for a second.
Okay.
If your movie requires a viewer to hop on Reddit and read a 4,000-word essay dissecting the frequency modulation of a distorted whisper just to understand the basic plot of your movie.
Didn't you fail at your job as a director?
Exactly. At what point does artistic ambiguity just become a shield for a script that didn't know how to end?
That is the tightrope every psychological horror film must walk.
It's a fine line.
If you lean too far into exposition, you become a textbook. If you lean too far into ambiguity, you become an ink blot test.
Right.
But when you zoom out and look at how modern audiences consume media, ambiguity is an incredibly powerful tool for longevity.
Because it keeps people talking.
By refusing to confirm whether the threat was a demon or a mental breakdown, Touzon ensures the film stays alive in the cultural conversation.
Because there's no right answer to solve and move on from.
Precisely. And more importantly, whether the threat is a literal demon or a psychological collapse, the film is fundamentally exploring the exact same themes.
That's a great point.
It is interrogating the terrifying burden of sustaining life, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of our mental and spiritual foundations when faced with unimaginable, isolating stress.
The ambiguity isn't a failure to tell a cohesive story. It is a refusal to limit the story to a single, easily digestible, easily dismissed meaning.
It forces the audience to confront the themes rather than just cataloging the plot points.
It makes the movie sticky. It stays lodged in your brain because your mind is continually trying to resolve the dissonance.
And speaking of things being deeply rooted and inescapable, that brings us to a massive real-world revelation about the production.
This is the part that really got me.
Because the themes of caregiver burnout, the liminal dread of a dying parent, the suffocating atmosphere of that house, they aren't just clever narrative devices.
They are intensely, painfully real.
This is where the context of the production completely recontextualizes the final product.
Right.
A user on the r/A24 thread linked out to an obscure interview with Ian Torson confirming a devastating detail.
What did you say?
Towson wrote the screenplay for Undertone and subsequently directed it while he was actively providing end-of-life care for his own dying parents.
He was living the exact scenario he put on screen.
He was literally up late, sitting in the dark of his childhood home, listening to the agonizing sounds of his parents wasting away in the next room.
That is so heavy.
When you hear that, the entire atmosphere of the movie suddenly snaps into focus. He didn't invent that heavy, suffocating dread. He recorded it.
That painful accuracy of the physical discomfort, the sheer bone-deep exhaustion of Evie.
A specific terror of sitting in a quiet house and listening to a loved one struggle to breathe.
He took his own raw, active grief and funneled it directly into this $500,000 micro-budget project.
Which perfectly explains why even the most vocal detractors of the film's chaotic ending still admitted that the first hour of the movie was incredibly tense.
You cannot manufacture that level of lived-in despair.
You really can't fake it. It bleeds through the screen.
The camera work, the pacing, the sound design, it all radiates the authentic, isolating terror of watching death slowly approach a loved one.
And that authentic emotional truth resulted in the ultimate Hollywood twist for this story.
A24 got involved.
A24, the studio that has practically monopolized prestige modern horror, saw this tiny, abrasive, deeply personal film and bought it in a 7-figure deal.
Which is life-changing money.
They knew it would polarize audiences, but they also knew it was undeniable. And the industry ripple effect didn't stop there.
Blumhouse entered the chat.
Yes. Based entirely on the masterful, panic-inducing use of sound design and atmospheric tension in Undertone, Blumhouse Productions took notice.
Blumhouse being the titan behind franchises like Insidious, The Purge, and Get Out.
Exactly. Blumhouse hired Touzon.
They tapped this micro-budget indie director to helm the massive, highly anticipated upcoming reboot of the Paranormal Activity franchise.
Which is incredibly poetic, given that Reddit users were literally mocking Undertone by calling it a movie about someone listening to paranormal activity.
It's a full circle moment.
The larger implication here about the film industry is vital.
How so?
In the horror genre, genuine emotional truth is the ultimate currency. You don't need a massive budget, you don't need A-list celebrities, and you don't need high-end CGI monsters.
You can literally shoot a movie in your childhood living room with a laptop.
But if you can capture a true, raw, universal human fear in this case, the isolating terror of grief and the burden of caregiving, the industry will take notice.
Raw, emotional truth, even when it is wrapped in a frustrating, wildly polarizing package that makes audiences groan, will always cut through the noise.
Undertone served as a highly profitable calling card for Touzon because it forced people to feel something profound.
Even if that feeling was deep, uncomfortable anxiety.
It demanded a visceral reaction. Even the people who hated the movie were moved to actively groan and boo at the screen. You can't argue with that level of engagement.
Indifference is the real enemy of art.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's trace the journey we've just been on.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started in a childhood home, looking at a director using his own active grief and a micro-budget constraint to build a story.
We watched that story evolve into a fiercely divisive theatrical release that literally caused audiences to freeze in terror or laugh in frustration.
We unpacked the mechanical brilliance of oral terror, learning how Dolby Atmos and active noise canceling can hijack our evolutionary biology to trap us in a nightmare.
We explored how ambiguity breeds deep, fan-driven lore.
And finally, we saw how raw emotional truth launched a major Hollywood career.
It stands as a fascinating testament to the highly subjective nature of fear in cinema.
What feels like boring, pretentious slop to one viewer is a paralyzing existential mirror to another.
Exactly.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to take with you the next time you sit in a dark theater.
We currently live in an incredibly, almost aggressively visual culture.
We really do.
We are constantly overstimulated by screens, by endless scrolling feeds, by hyper-realistic computer graphics that can show us anything we can imagine.
Undertone made the radical, hostile choice to strip almost all of that visual data away,
forcing us to rely entirely on our ears.
It raises an important question for you to explore on your own. If our brains are biologically wired to fear the unknown in the dark, is the ultimate horror movie one that eventually removes the visual element entirely?
Good, true. Pure terror exists not in the grotesque monsters we are forced to look at, but in the silent, dark spaces we are forced to listen to.
And suddenly that sensory deprivation tank doesn't sound so relaxing anymore. Maybe taking away the picture entirely is exactly how you find out what you're truly afraid of. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep your headphones on and maybe leave a light on tonight.